Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Asking for a Friend. This is a podcast engaging questions from young adults wanting to know how to navigate and live life this side of eternity, how to follow Jesus. My name is Nathan. I'm with my wife, Rebecca.
Hi. Yep, Nathan and I are looking at your questions. We love them. Keep sending them. And then we're going to answer them to the best of our ability, right?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. You ready for a question?
Go.
Okay. How do you approach completing a traditional fast, or even what would prompt a traditional fast?
Beautiful question. We were just talking about this before we hit record. Last night, one of my sons asked me, like, what is fasting, Dad? I know you fasted for us. What is this? So we wanted to like set a foundation or a framework for some of these terms. So first of all, there's this great little book for those wanting to know more about fasting and biblical fasting. It's this little book called God's Chosen Fast, written by Arthur Wallace. Shameless plug. You can find it on Amazon. There's three different types of fast that we see in the Bible. There's a normal fast, absolute fast, and then a partial fast. A normal fast, which was the words used in this question, a normal fast is where you don't eat food, but you still drink water. We see this, the first time we see this in the New Testament is Jesus. Right after he was baptized, it said he went into the wilderness and he fasted, and the enemy didn't tempt him with drink, but he tempted him with food. So part of our deduction is like, okay, he engaged in a traditional fast, which was Jesus ate nothing, but he still must have drank something while he was out in the wilderness. So traditional fast. Absolute fast means no food and no water. Esther engaged in this and asked her uncle Mordecai to engage in that as well. We see Ezra do this a little bit in the Old Testament. So traditional fast, absolute fast, and then the third type of fast, to summarize fasts biblically, is a partial fast. And that could be a restriction of some sort of diet and or other things in our lives. Maybe you'll speak to that a little bit. But Daniel, we see take a partial fast. There's a Nazirite vow we've talked about before in this podcast. I think you could argue that there's a partial fast there. Could be for a lifetime. Paul talks about maybe married couples fasting from physical intimacy in 1 Corinthians 7. So there are different types of partial fasts engaged, spoken of in the Bible.
Good.
So that's kind of the foundation, framework of fasting, quick review. Yeah. But what would prompt a normal fast? Why have you fasted? We fasted. What's it look like?
Yeah. Well, first, you have really taught me a lot about fasting just by modeling it to me in your own personal life. I remember dating and you fasting, probably because I kept breaking up with you and you were like, let me see if I fast to get some answers regarding this. But I mean, God invites us to fast. And there has been times where I have felt the Lord's prompting as I've prayed, like, okay, Lord, there's this thing ahead. And I'm not totally sure, or I'm needing some direction, or I'm wanting direction. And I feel an invitation to do some sort of fast. For me, it's usually just been a partial fast of some sort, whether it's food for a day, not 24 hours, but a day, or a meal, or caffeine, or social media. And I think for me, it's just about a clearing of my mind and being open to what, the Lord is going to say something, speak to me, hopefully, being intentional at putting aside time for prayer, asking questions, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think the same thing. My encouragement would be like, you can fast out of practice or discipline. I think that's beautiful. I think in many ways it's biblical, but I also encourage people to fast like God's going to invite you to a fast because there may be things he wants to speak to you about. Yeah. And so the fast could be both ways. Engaged by me. Yeah. God, I need you to speak to me about a decision. Sure. We fasted over decisions we had to make about jobs, living, medical stuff, healing, kids. But then also, like, the best fast is when God says, hey, Nathan, hey, Rebecca, hey, whoever, I'm calling you to this fast because I want to speak to you about some things.
Sometimes it's not a super convenient time to answer that call. And we can maybe talk more about that in a minute. But
one thing I do want to say about fasting, I love this language. I can't remember where I got it from. But whenever we talk about fasting, I try to articulate this, is that the focus is not so much on what we're fasting from, but what we're feasting on. That sounds like very pastory alliteration, but it's not so much about the fast, but the feast. And so one of our friends, I was talking with him a couple weeks ago, and in college, he would fast. I don't know, however so often, but he said he'd sit down at his table. Let me use Rebecca's Bible. He'd like sit out on his dining room table and he'd set out a plate like he's going to eat dinner. Instead of putting the food on his plate, he'd take his Bible, he'd open it up and he'd set it on his plate. And he'd just spend that time that he would have spent eating, feasting on the word, and which I think is just a beautiful picture and maybe a great encouragement for anyone fasting.
Really
Isn't that awesome?
That makes me emotional. Wow.
Okay, so the question was like, what would prompt a traditional fast? Our experiences, God's invitation, practice discipline. What about ending a fast? What would be your encouragement for how do you end a fast?
Yeah. Well, I think you end a fast, in the tangible physical way of it, whether it's food or, refraining from something, and then also in a spiritual way. So physically, like let's say it's fasting from food, right? I will be very intentional about what is going to be the first thing that I eat or drink again. I think about that. And I don't know if it matters. I think of it more like what you were saying. I thought you were going to say this, like sitting down with intention to end a fast, sitting down with food. I think too, there's something really powerful about fasting together and then coming together to break a fast when it comes to food. Spiritually, what do you think? How do you end a fast spiritually?
I think spiritually, my encouragement would be, well, kind of the way you already even described it, being intentional about like the first things you're to eat or drink after, to like make that a moment with the Lord, maybe to spiritually engage with God out of gratitude and thanks, whether the thing you're fasting about crystallized or not, but just God, thank you for the past X amount of time.
Yeah.
And I've been able to feast with you. So maybe a purpose, intentional prayer, journal writing about the experience of the last however long, considering the time that's been spent with the Lord and what he's taught you. And so it could be both communication with God about, God, thank you for X, Y, and Z, or just reflecting on that time yourself. I also think physically, depending on how long you're fasting, if you're fasting from food, you really want to consider just practically for your stomach and your body what you're going to, I probably wouldn't break a fast with
a nitro.
Yeah, like tons of caffeine and or like a whole pizza and
of course.
Carbonated soda, whatever. Like especially if it's long, maybe start with some bone broth, like some soup, and like ease in. Like be careful with your gut in a practical sense.
Right. I mean, people that are fasting for days. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. What about fasting? Like, has fasting always ended like super euphoric? Like, remember that time when Moses spent time with God on the mountain? He came down and he was just like glowing, and he had to wear a veil. Like, has your fasting experience ended like that, where you're like, I got so much revelation, I got so much insight, man, I know exactly the decisions we need to make. What's that look like for you? Maybe it's a loaded question.
I mean, I feel for some reason I'm feeling sensitive to like talking about this. And does Jesus say something about talking like fasting and
Sure. Yeah. So Sermon on the Mount, he does talk about fasting, and he does talk about when you fast, not if you fast, which may be another teaching. So I think fasting should happen. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But he does say, and I think he's speaking more to the heart of pride and arrogance. When you fast, do it kind of in the quiet. Don't brag. Don't walk around like, sorry, man, I'm fasting. I'm so spiritual. I can't. I'd love to go to lunch with you, but I'm fasting that day. I'm praying about X, Y, and Z. So not, I think, I don't want to like push you in a direction you don't want to say. But
I think that that's important to say, because to answer your question about how has fasting ended, I spent almost a year fasting over a specific thing in our family, and there has been no revelation. There has been no healing, maybe some new direction, but it actually feels more confusing. And that's not why I don't stop. That's not why I did, knowing that could be a possibility. I mean, it's disheartening, yes, but we've also had fasting where we've had clarity, a clear mind. I think for me in that situation where I'm like still waiting for some sort of direction or movement, it is more of a discipline thing for me in my faith, in my journey of like following Jesus and trusting him in hard things. It becomes just more of like keep going.
Yeah. I think that's important to note for those of us listening, watching, where we're taking this in. Like, I think the assumption is like whenever someone fasts, first they're like crazy spiritual. They're so close to God. And second, they probably get some deep revelation and insight. And so when I try it, it doesn't always end like that. So I must be doing it wrong. Or maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe God doesn't want to speak to me. I don't think that's always the case. And so I think it's important for us to like be transparent about those things. That sometimes I spend X amount of days fasting, and that time is more of that time is spent with me, like arguing with myself about trying not to eat the thing that I see around the office or the house than it is like really in deep devotion with God.
I mean, you hear all sides of it, right? Some people are like, it was so easy. I was so in tune with the Lord. I felt very at peace. And then other times it's exactly that.
Yeah.
So I remember being in high school and my youth group fasting in a group. Was that like a thing? And I never did it. I was afraid to do it. And I mean, my encouragement is just to try. Start small. Start with a partial fast. Start with something that feels like not maybe as big of a mountain as like a 3-day fast or a week-long fast or something like that.
Yeah. Any final words I know you just said it, but anything else beyond that? Just
do it.
Nike. My encouragement would be the same.
Yeah.
You know, often like we may fast to seek something from God or about God. And I think that is probably the primary purpose in fasting, but often in our fast, God reveals a lot about ourselves too. And so I often realize how weak I am, how silly I am, how much certain things have a hold on my life when I fast. Yeah. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. I hope that's encouraging. Keep sending in your questions. Thank y'all.
Thank you for watching or listening to this episode of Asking for a Friend. We love the opportunity to dive deeper into these topics. And if you have any more questions, we would love for you to send it in. So how do they do that?
Yeah, you can do that by DMing us at LCCHaven. You could email us, haven@lccredding.org, or you could text it in, area code 530-338-1237. And if you're new to Haven, the young adult ministry, this is a young adult ministry of Little Country Church in Redding, California. And it's our desire and aim to rally young adults to the Word of God, mission of Jesus, and to be filled and led by His Spirit. And then to release wherever God has sent us that we might be able to rally others to the very same thing.